Billboard is what I call a cine experience. And what I mean by a cine experience is we've created a story world where we're telling various parts of the story on different platforms. Some people used to call it transmedia, but I actually got away from using that term after teaching at university and doing a bunch of public speaking and things, because originally people thought I was talking about transgender media, not actually stories that are told on multiple platforms. We created this story across multiple platforms where we have a feature film, a web series, and also a radio station. So Billboard is a feature film called Billboard, where we tell a story about a radio station that's struggling to survive. It's a story of entrepreneurism. It's a story of struggle. It's also a play on media quite a bit, of how media affects the success or failure of somebody. I'm not just talking about news media, mind you. I'm also talking about social media. Like, for instance, you own a business and one of your employees has a bad day one day. They take it out on a customer. All of a sudden, that customer puts it all around social media, and now all of a sudden, you're in recovery mode. So it's a play on all these sorts of things that people kind of take for granted and people don't really think about and they don't do a deep dive into. So the web series focuses on the 4 people living on the billboard. It's a little bit more comedic than the feature film, but we really don't leave that billboard. And it's a matter of survival, it's a matter of gamemanship, it's a matter of like how community rallies around something and then they don't. It's a playoff of news cycles as well. And it's really a matter of the desperation that we have in society in terms of trying to succeed. Like, for instance, is the American dream still possible, right? We play on that quite a bit as well. Will the next generation be better off than their parents? And quite honestly, do people even care? So it's a play on a lot of different issues and so forth, but how we actually launched this entire project was by creating a radio station, WTYT 960, where there's over 1,000 bands on the site from all over the world. We're in 22 countries, 49 states. South Dakota is our only holdout. And what we've been doing with WTYT 960 is doing a bunch of co-creation, I call it, where we give bands the opportunity to be heard. We promote bands, we create contests for them, to win gigs, even equipment and also ways to promote themselves. So it's important for me to enable other artists to be able to be a part of the project, and so that we then in turn actually promote them. We're not really looking for much back in return, because again, it's a lot more outward facing than it is inward. And so, with the bands, we then we selected the music, I should say, for the feature film and also for the web series. Another thing we did with the radio station is we put out a call for contestants, AKA a way that we cast the film, where people created videos stating why they'd feel they'd be a great Billboard Cine contestant, and then we aggregate their social media. They create profile on WTYT 960, and some of the people with the most votes ended up being in the film and so forth. And so we're offering different sorts of opportunities for the audience to be involved. And so then when it's actually time to finally release the film, which we're going to be doing in a couple of months, is that we're going to be doing pop-up events at different movie theaters where some of our DJs might be running around handing out free swag based off the radio station and things, and kind of bringing the fun back to cinema. Things that are pretty much lost in terms of corporate greed and things that they're only looking for return. I mean, mind you, in the business you have to look at return, but they're more worried about ultimate success than actually bringing the fun back. They'll actually aid in their success, I feel. Like those that are old enough to remember like the Flash Gordon decoder rings that you would get if you went to go see a Flash Gordon movie back in, I think it was the 40s or so. But Billboard is really a very large project done by a very small team of dedicated people in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And the reason that I actually stay in Allentown, or why I make movies here, is I literally moved back home to make a difference. At that time, back in the late 90s, a lot of people were saying that Allentown's basically an armpit of the country, thanks to the Billy Joel song. And so I literally moved home to make a difference, and that's why I basically create in the Lehigh Valley. So the big influence of why I create this way is that I was raised pretty much in an amusement park. My family started Dorney Park in Allentown, Pennsylvania, many, many years ago, back in the late 1800s. They basically came over from France, landed in Philadelphia. They were butchers by trade. They ended up moving north and started doing catering and so forth. And to increase the sales of catering, they brought in rides. So literally it started out actually as a food business, not an amusement park business. Okay, so it constantly kept evolving. So then as a kid, in the off season, we would basically play in the park. We would slide down the roller coasters on our rear ends and things. In fact, it's kind of funny that mention the roller coaster is that my great-grandfather wasn't exactly the nicest of men, quite honestly. He tried to get divorced from my great-grandmother, and my great-grandmother knew that if she stayed married to him, she would end up one day owning the park. So what he did was he built a house for her underneath the main hill of Thunderhawk, which we call the yellow roller coaster, or the coaster for short. And he built her a house underneath the main hill, and she ended up living there for over 62 years. So I kind of have this idea of perseverance and things in my blood. And she did end up outliving him as well. Excuse me. And so what I used to do as a kid is I would go around with my grandfather checking all the safety things, right? We go into the bowels of the park and things. And that's another reason why I tell the movie of Billboard is a little bit different than what a lot of people are expecting as being this huge spectacle. Grow up in an amusement park, you kind of like go behind the facades of these buildings and so forth, and how it's plastic and how it's brilliant colors and everything else. But that brilliant colors and that beautiful kind of plastic forms are on cinder block, which is pretty dirty and dismal and so forth. So I've always been more interested in what goes on behind the scenes than I actually do the spectacle itself, and that's one reason why the film is more about the radio station than it is the actual contest itself. And so going around the park and things as a kid, I used to be able to, there was a zoo at Dorney Park at the time, and I'd go in and do the safety checks with my grandfather there in the monkey pens, and so I got to play with chimpanzees and prairie dogs and all this kind of crazy stuff. And so growing up at the park was a pretty interesting way of growing up. But I got to tell you, in retrospect, it's extraordinarily effective how I create today. And what do I mean by that is that in an amusement park, you either have a ride or an entertainment. And around that ride or entertainment, you have different sorts of profit centers. You have your games of chance, you have your merchandise, you have your food. And so I kind of started creating in this way early on in my career, not realizing what it was just by sheer influence of family. And so it really is affected of how I tell stories. And for instance, back when I was growing up, Kittyland at Dorney Park was a complete world. You had your water fountains that came out of a lion's head and things like this. And so they would create worlds, just like in Disney World, they'll have a Frontierland where everything is based around that one theme. The rides are kind of decorated that way. The people, the hosts, I guess they call them, are dressed a certain way. The food is all complimentary to that land at Dorney Park, or I'm sorry, at Disney World. And so I've started to create this way with cinema, where I literally am creating story worlds where people can jump in and jump out of the different elements of the story. People can be equally entertained just watching the web series or seeing the movie, or listening to WTYT, or going out to the bands that we sponsor and things at live events where we're promoting different things as well. So it's really a matter of creating these story worlds instead of just a simple linear storyline, where it also aids not only in the storytelling, it gives me a lot more freedom of creation, but it also is a way for audiences to get more involved within the story. So it's not only freeing me as a creative and be able to create a lot more things around a simple idea, but it's also a way for audience to become very engaged in the project early on, and then they can kind of take ownership of the project itself. The other interesting thing about, I get a little bit criticized for having a lot of product placement and things within my content. And it's something I've been doing very early on because I've always wanted to tell my stories as authentically as possible. And to live an authentic life basically means that you're surrounded by brands in this day and age. So I make a concerted effort to have a lot of product placement in my films. And another reason why I learned about this early on was that I remember listening to one of my uncles negotiating the syrup contract for the soft drinks between Pepsi and Coke. And the funny thing is they're almost exactly the same amount of money that they were spending and things. It all came down to the free stuff that the park would get. So I started to realize this early on that, okay, if I engage brands, not only am I going to have a more authentic story that I'm telling, but it's also a way that I can possibly drive revenue to my projects by offering brands the opportunity of exposure. And that's one of the things that we definitely do with Billboard. So growing up in an amusement park was awesome for certain respects and also not so awesome in others. My first job was actually as a clown selling balloons. I don't know how many people have sold balloons on asphalt in Pennsylvania in the middle of August wearing clown makeup with Mylar balloons, like kind of like you as a big mirror right on your face and everything else. It was quite a challenge, but it's also fun too. I learned quite a bit at the park. And I hold so many dear memories, not all good, mind you, but memories nonetheless. But that's a big reason why I create the way I do.